So taking a look at the Middle East is a hard place to conquer, really. Lots of desert. Afghanistan, in particular, it's not necessarily part of the Middle East, but it's often sort of lumped in there. Afghanistan has countries have tried to conquer Afghanistan again and again, and it keeps it keeps holding up. So you have the Crimean War. Russia attacks the Ottoman Empire but loses. Russia's trying to, they're in the north. They're trying to get a direct line to the open ocean so they can have ships into port and all that stuff. So they're trying to kind of go directionally down to the water into, the Crimea. But they lose, and then Russia fights Britain over India and loses. Russia just can't get it together. And then Britain fights for control in Afghanistan and loses. So there's Afghanistan trying to put up a fight. And again, with Britain, it's just the terrain. It's very mountainous. And you got people living in the mountains who can just, you got guerrilla warfare and stuff. It just doesn't really pan out. So instead of Britain going into Afghanistan and kind of going in that way through from west to east, they go in through China going east to west. And we'll talk about that in a bit. So taking a look at Egypt, Egypt breaks away from the Ottoman Empire and all newly independent and stuff. And they begin economic and military reforms, start to be their own country, sort of get up on their feet. And they move to cotton, Egyptian cotton. Ooh, it's fancy cotton. You get Egyptian cotton sheets, and it's, ooh, you're fancy. And the Suez Canal. So canal connecting the Red Sea to the Mediterranean, and I believe I have a map coming up here, so I'll talk about it again. And so they start digging the Suez Canal, but they take loans from Britain. Britain's like, hey, let's loan you some money, and we'll help you, through money. You guys go ahead and build the canal, but, to pay for machinery and all that stuff, you take out loans with us. And then Britain kind of, Egypt creates this huge debt, and Britain basically forecloses on the debt and says, you owe us all this money. You dug this cool trench. It's ours now. And then they just occupy Egypt, and they take financial control. And this is a tactic that isn't really talked about, is gaslighting. Gaslighting is when you, in your head, know that you're going to manipulate someone into doing something. And it's done in a variety of ways. Like, if you're in a relationship, and again, high school relationships, they're kind of all test drives. But if you're with your significant other and they're like, what's wrong? And you're like, nothing. Well, no, just the way you said nothing. There's got to be something wrong. There's nothing wrong. Okay, why are you getting angry with me? I'm not angry with you. It's just I don't like having to repeat myself. Nothing is wrong. Okay, look, I was concerned about you, and now you're turning this into an argument, and I really don't appreciate it. And you're like, what the? So that's gaslighting. And countries do it to themselves, or countries do it to each other. So in this sense, Britain gaslit Egypt. Oops. Map is off screen. Hold on a second. Let me fix that. Doop de doop de doop de doo. There we go. Da da da. Boop 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 boop. There you go. All right. I don't know why there's a jellyfish there, but whatever. There's a jellyfish there. Okay, whatever. Maybe it's jellyfish migration. Who knows? But this is probably one of the best maps I could pull off Google. So here's the Suez Canal. Here's Egypt. And here's the Mediterranean, here's the Red Sea. So if you can kind of zoom out geographically, Britain's up over here, and they need a quick way to get through to China and all that, and India. Going around Africa, if you remember the size of that African map, it's freaking huge. So going around Africa, it's very costly. But this quick little shortcut, that is awesome. So you have Persia, which we now call Iran. So Iranians are not Middle Eastern, they're Persian. Russia wants trade routes. Britain wants oil. Uh-oh. So tobacco. Here we go. Persian ruler allows for tobacco trade, but people riot, and Russia and Britain divide Persia and take over. So here's an interesting scenario where, again, Persia is being gaslit. So Russia wants trade routes, Britain wants oil. So they start trading tobacco. And Britain and Russia knew that tobacco was going to be unpopular because the indigenous population view smoking as sinful. Okay, so you have a way in. The Persian ruler allows for tobacco trade because, of course, who's going to get paid with this tobacco trade? The Persian ruler. Hey, cool. But the people find out what's going on. They get really upset. They rebel against their own country. And then Britain and Russia are like, you know what? You can't handle your own house, and we have a deal. So we're going to take over because apparently you can't handle it. When all from the start, they wanted as much control of the area as possible. So yeah, you'll go ahead and pause and fill this out. The construction of the Suez Canal is an example of geopolitics. So Britain specifically targeted Egypt because of that trade route that would shave off a ton of time. So yeah, the Suez Canal was a geopolitical decision by Britain. Troubles in India. There we go. So India was under Muslim rule, and that was called the Mughal Empire. It included India, and this is in the 1500s. And Britain slowly took over, and it was called the crown jewel of the British Empire. It was Britain's most valuable colony. We like to think that the United States, because we rebelled against them and they lost and all that stuff, like, haha, Britain, huh? But when you take a look at like what Britain had possessed, we were kind of a drop in the bucket at the time. And we ended up trading partners, so it really wasn't that giant of a loss. Britain takes India's raw materials. India can only buy from Britain. So here's kind of the fun part, is if you produced your own products in country, like let's say that Britain wasn't in India, you can make your own salt, you can grow your own tea, all of that stuff. And you can have your own in-country market. Britain takes over, turns everything into a cash crop, but you're not allowed to buy from any any Indian stores. You got to buy from British stores. So people in India are actually paying higher prices because of Britain's involvement. And cash crops cause famines. So when you take over land with tea, you can't eat tea. And if you have a growing population, you have a lot of people who can't be fed. So this is going to cause famines. The Raj. So after all these issues, Britain takes direct command of India, and it lasts 200 years, all the way up to 1946, 47, somewhere in there. The East India Company dominates the region. The East India Company is like a corporation. It is a company, but it's allowed to exist because Great Britain says you can exist. And so it's a huge company for the time too. I mean, they the one and only sort of huge company. Rules until the 1880s, and it's staffed by sepoys, basically Indian and Muslim soldiers. So in India, you have people who are Hindu, you have people who are Sikh, which is so Hindu and Sikh are two different religions. And then you have Islam or Muslims. So you have sort of all three. And then you also have Christians. So some Indians converted over to Christianity. So the Sepoy Rebellion. Rebellion over rifle cartridges. So Muslims could not eat animal fat, or at least pork, and Hindus couldn't eat cow fat. So kind of as a way to gaslight, the sepoys, the powder cartridges had fat stuffed in as kind of like a cork to keep the cartridge. So you'd bite the end off and you'd pour it down your barrel and then you'd load up your gun. Well, the fact that they had to bite that fat, they didn't appreciate it much. Oh, the picture got messed up again. Here we go. And There we go. And this was their method of execution. They would tie them off to a cannon and then fire the cannon. At least it's a quick way to go, but it is pretty brutal. And here's another sort of depiction of the Sepoy Rebellion. So let's talk China. Rejects the West. Britain tries to come in and say, hey, let's open up. But China isn't having any of it. They never really were like a big sort of let's get into the global trade kind of thing. They just didn't buy into it. They were largely self-sufficient. They were able to they got along for thousands of years. So people coming over and say, hey, let's trade, you're going to benefit. They're like, no, we're good. So they had agriculture, mining, manufacturing, and it was very highly productive. They were, cool, just doing everything in-house. Tea and opium. So China allowed one port for the British, and they could go across the country, and supposedly they were trading. They were gathering tea, but they were also gathering opium, and China told them, do not gather opium. And along the way, to create demand for opium, you get people addicted. So the Chinese started demanding opium because they were getting addicted. And China earns more from its exports than it spends on imports. So this is kind of like a benefit to China, but it's that opium problem. So the British are smuggling opium in the late 1700s, and many Chinese become addicted. And it's sort of like an opium den. You just sit down and it's kind of like, think of it like a restaurant where you're high all the time, or like a hookah lounge, I guess, where you have someone come around, and if you have the money, they supply you with opium, which is kind of like heroin, just kind of a different chemical form, and you just smoke out until you die, and then they just take your corpse out back, do something with it, probably pay some dude to cart it off, and hey, look, there's an open room for the next person. So here's China, everyone's wanting to carve up China, and here's a Chinese person in the background. So this is Queen Victoria, and then this is France, and then you have Japan kind of looking at it there, and Germany, and China going, hey, wait a minute, what are you doing carving my country up? I didn't say you could do that. So here's what you call spheres of influence. Here's Russia kind of surrounding Germany here. Here's the British, and they followed sort of a trail here. You got the French, so China's kind of completely surrounded. China has growing internal problems.